Hello, friends, and welcome to the Shadow.n.soul Storytime podcast. I'm really excited to be here with you in this way. For those of you who are new to me, my name is Rayneen Thebeau. And for those of you who are not only not new to me, but have maybe been around for quite some time, you may remember the last time I was offering this kind of work in the form of On and Off the Mat, which was my first podcast that I started in 2017, I think. So this episode is actually going to be both the last episode of On and Off the Mat and also the very first episode of Shadow.n.soul story time. And I feel like I'm coming back to you and to this podcast a very, very different version of myself. So I guess I'll start by going back a little bit. When I very first started On and Off the Mat, like I said, it was in 2017, about 6 years ago. It was during a time in my life where I felt very much on fire. Like I was doing the podcast, I was doing YouTube stuff, I was taking marketing courses, I was like hot out of YTT and like really shifting my work in really big ways. And I remember having this practice where it came to me like so loud and clear. I was meditating, if I'm remembering correctly, and it was just like this really big, undeniable voice. It was like I want to say the most potent time I've been like spoken to by the divine or soul or universe or whatever word other than self. It was literally like being yelled at. Like I feel like I had maybe been hearing these, or not maybe, I definitely was like hearing these like whispers of like slowing down, doing less, like taking it easy. Cause I was like I was doing a lot. I think at the time I was coaching varsity high school women's lacrosse as like the head coach. I was doing personal training. I was teaching group fitness classes. I was teaching yoga. And then I was doing all of this like extra like online stuff, trying to like get my own business going. It was intense. So anyway, hearing these little whispers, kind of ignoring the little whispers. And then one day in my practice, it was just literally like, stop, like stop, all of it. Like it was so loud that I literally felt jolted. I was like, literally, like, it was so undeniable and like so abrupt. And I want to say like so aggressive that it was like, again, back to this word of just like undeniable. It was undeniable. And as much, and I knew it was talking about like my work, I knew it was talking about all the things that I was doing. And although there was this part of me that like so didn't understand at the time, I do now in hindsight. But at the time I didn't understand. I was like, I'm on fire. Like, why would I stop? Why would I stop? Like I'm on fire. I knew that I had to listen because by this point I had been very, very, very intentionally trying to cultivate this relationship with soul, with higher self, with divine, with deeper, wiser wisdom within. Like, and by me not listening to this like very clear guidance, it felt like I would be deliberately disobeying that which I have been seeking. And so I did. And so I stopped. I stopped the podcast. I stopped with the YouTube. I stopped with the marketing. I let go of coaching. I let go of group fitness classes, one being Body Combat, which will make an appearance later in the show. Uh, and I really just started to focus on that which was calling me most, which was yoga. And, in that time, now I can look back and be like, okay, I get it. Like I so get like why I needed to stop. And with that being said, I always knew that I would want to come back, especially to the podcast. And so I really like kept it in my back pocket and I just knew that I would know when it was time. Now, in that meantime, before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit more about my intentions with this new version. I wouldn't even want to say new version because it's like on and off the mat will be dying, if you will, and Shadow and Soul Storytime will be being born. And my intention with this podcast is the reason why I call it Storytime is because my intention with it is just to have really casual conversations, whether they're like solo or whether I have a guest on the show, but just really casual conversations around like our day to day life, like this life, and all of the lessons and the medicine that are in our experiences if we're willing to be curious and be open to them. What comes up with that is that there's this perspective that we can choose that is, life is not happening to us, rather, it's happening for us. And as long as we can like be with our life experiences fully, to witness the full spectrum of it, to feel the full spectrum of it, to be curious, to not take a victim role in our life, instead to empower ourselves to like really like take ownership and to, like I said, look at it from this lens of life is not happening to us, it's happening for us. So always coming back to this question of like, what is here for me? What is here for me? What is here for me? And because I personally believe that we come into this life very much not only needing, but I would go as far as to say is like choosing the themes behind the circumstances in our life that will help us grow and evolve. Like we need challenges, we need difficulties, we need things to overcome in order to transform, in order to like blossom into like who we're meant to be and to have the experiences that we're meant to have. And I think when we really adopt that way of not only looking at life, but interacting with life, we find like the richness that exists in the mundane and how that is also like at its core, like so deeply magical. And so it's just that I want to have those conversations. I I would love to, and here's the other thing. I really feel that there's not only lessons in medicine in our life circumstances and like looking deeper and like being curious and like going into the shadows and like listening to the soul and like all, like I understand, yes, there's lessons in medicine in that, and yes, and that's what I want these conversations to be about. And I also think that there's this other layer of medicine that comes in the sharing of it, in the being witnessed. So not only for me, but for everyone. And it's funny because I think back to like when I was in YTT and of the whole 9 months and of all the things we did, when asked like what was the most challenging part, my answer was the sharing. And for many reasons, like I just hated it so much, right? It's vulnerable, you feel exposed, like you feel unsafe sometimes, like you don't know who you can trust. It's like it can be so icky. And it's a perfect example of what I was just talking about. I feel like that was a challenge and an obstacle for me to get over and to get through so that I could receive the benefits and the medicine of sharing. And so here it is. I feel like it's such a big part of not only what like is healing me in my process, it's also what I get to dish up to others when trying to serve. And on the flip side of that, so not as only is there medicine for the person that is sharing and being witnessed, I feel there's also immense medicine on the receiving end, on those who get to witness another and like receive another, and like the parallels that we get to draw because we're so similar in so many ways. And so when we hear someone sharing a story, it holds a mirror up for us to be like, oh man, that really touches inside here. And it allows us to like step through a door that it maybe wouldn't have been opened otherwise. And so here's this invitation for this episode and for all future episodes to like listen with your entire being. And so I'm actually going to invite you to take a moment, unless you're driving. If you're driving, please keep your eyes open. You can absolutely breathe with us, but like keep your eyes on the road. But this invitation to like pause, and if you're able to like close your eyes for a moment, to exhale all your breath away, I'll do it with you. And then to take a really deep breath into your nose and out through your mouth. And to like really, really listen with all of you, like not like rational mind, but like sacred mind, and not like small heart, but like really big heart. And like just to like open up your entire body to receive whatever it is that's here for you, and let it speak to you through sensations, through knowings, through thoughts, through emotions, through memories. And like, can we be open to receiving those messages and not denying them or like pushing them aside or rationalizing them away? Just being really curious. And so that's that. That's the invitation. That's the invitation. So with that being said, this story now I want to say it part starts many years ago with the big stop, with the big pause. And there's going to be weavings in and out of like all of that time in between, with really like maybe next time frame is like really in the last like year or so, and then like really in like the last month or so. I feel like this is almost like one of those like TV episodes or like a movie where it's like goes back to the future, or like goes back to like the past and then comes back to like the present and then it goes to the future, and it's kind of like hopping all over. I'm trying my best to like keep this like distilled and making sense. But yeah, there's a lot here. And I feel like it's a really beautiful culmination of a lot of different things. So after that big stop and the pause and the slowly like pulling back and the doing less, like really what I've been working on over these last like 6, 7 years, there's like two main themes that come up. The first one being that the slowing down, the doing less, the untangling of the workaholic ways of being that I had really developed within myself. Um, and then this other really potent, important piece of like rel releasing as much as I could, but most importantly, not allowing the fear of like what other people think to hold me back from who I fully am and like the life that I want to live. I remember this like very distinct feeling. This was like at the end of 2016. I was like in a retreat styled workshop, and we were talking about like basically the desires of the soul. And what came up so loud and clear, aside again from the slowing down aspect, was like, I, like, my soul was longing and crying for it to like be fully expressed. Like, I wanted to be me so bad that it hurt. And yet, there was this also this other part of me, this unconscious part that I had to find, that's desire was in direct conflict with that. And so if one part of me was desiring to express and to be myself in the world, the other part of myself was like, absolutely not. We do not want to express. We do not want to be ourselves in the world because that shit ain't safe. And I feel like that's how it goes. A lot of the things that like we want, we have things that are in direct conflict with it, that are like in the shadow territory, that are like ultimately trying to keep us safe, right? And that's why like I love this work so much. It's like so juicy and it's like so good. But that's what I've really been working on over all of these years. And I want to say that like I started, and this is, I don't mean to be daunting, right? Because everyone's path is very different. And with that being said, it's really taken me pretty much all that time to really feel like I've come full circle on those things. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been like progress all along the way. Like, of course there has, and things I need to learn, and people I need to be in a relationship, and just like all of that, like it needed to happen exactly as it happened. And it wasn't really until about this time last year or so where I really started to feel like, huh, like, wow, like these things no longer have the hold on me that they once did. And what I found was that there was this like literal dying of an old version of self and this like old way of being and doing in the world, that like this version of self was like dying. And while this version of self was dying, which I'll like call like the workaholic, um, the one that's like afraid to like be in the world because of the worry of other people's thoughts and judgments, etc. Like that version of me was dying. And as that version of me was dying, there was this other version of me that was being born. And I specifically remember having this practice. It was actually in my teepee, which by the way, if you've never seen like any pictures of my teepee, I invite you to go look. It's such a beautiful sacred space that I'm so grateful for. Um, but anyway, I remember having this practice in there in the fall of last year, where like the imagery that was coming to me was like I was literally like giving birth. And as I'm like laying on the ground, like like in the process of like giving like birth, it's like every time I would go to like push to be like, okay, like what is this like new version of me and this new version of life that's like being born? Like every time I went to go push, I was met with like a stop, and I was met with resistance. And what came to me pretty clearly was this new version of self and this new phase of life cannot be born through effort. And it was like in that practice, I just kind of realized that's like, okay, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, there's this old version of me that's dying that was like really good at efforting, like masculine capacities, like overdeveloped, very much so. And now that I'd like gotten that fairly like under control and was like letting that version of self die, like now I was having to like step into this like new way of being, like more of like a feminine qualityed like aspect of self that was like more about being rather than doing, more about receiving than giving. uh yeah. So anyway, this new version of self like being born, and it was just like since then it's just been like this like trial and error of trying to like step into this way of being because it feels so foreign to me. Let's see, what else do I want to say about that? In this like process of like stepping into this like new version and this new like phase of life, one of the really big themes that has continued to come up is that of receiving. When you're looking at masculine, feminine, solar, lunar, yang, and yin, you're looking at like do and be, work and rest, give, receive. Um, these kinds of like polarities, if you, they're the same, they're different, um, like different sides of the same coin, but and different. And while I'm like learning to step into like this like receiving side, like that has been a super, super huge struggle. And another practice that I had, and how do I want to say this? Here's the thing, like this podcast is going to be really vulnerable. It just is. I don't think that we get to receive as much of the medicine if we're not really going to the places and talking about the things that are uncomfortable. And so, with that being said, know that, and we're about to talk about triggers actually, so it's a perfect segue. But like, if you feel triggered, if you feel emotional, if it kicks something up for you, which I hope it does, I hope it does, the invitation is to lean into it, to not push it aside, to not ignore it, to not pretend it didn't happen, to not make it, to not allow it you to like turn away from it, but instead to like lean in, to like look at it, to be curious. Because there is so much medicine and growth in our triggers. So that's the direction we're heading in, just saying. So I had this one practice, and what was shown to me was that part of the reason why I have such a hard time receiving in all of its forms, pleasure, abundance, joy, rest, etc., is because my body held slash holds, we're all a work in progress, we're all healing in progress, this story that it is unsafe to receive in pleasure, to be open, to be restful, because I had been raped when I was in college. I was drugged, and when it happened, I was unconscious. I was resting. I was as open, as vulnerable as one could be. And it was a very unsafe situation. And so it's like the body held that story. And when I saw that in my practice, it was kind of like the birthing thing. It was like, oh, aha moment of like, whoa, like that story lives inside of me. And it's difficult, right? It's difficult to look at that, and looking at it and seeing it has allowed me to start to tend to it, to heal it, to rewrite the story that lives in my body, that it is safe to rest, it is safe to be open, it is safe to receive, especially in joy, and here's our pleasure and joy. So here's something else that like I found like months later. I was on a bachelorette trip with one of my best friends, and we were at this like beach club during the day, and it was so much fun. It was so cool. It was beautiful. Like the music was bumping, the food was delicious, like people were having fun. It was awesome. I loved it. And I found myself when we were eating lunch, like feeling really anxious. And and this is my hope for you. I hope that like through this show like gives you like tips and tricks and tools and ways of resourcing yourself so that you can do the same kind of work. So I'm feeling anxious. I'm not trying to make a thing of it. I'm sitting at the table with like 5 or 6 other girls. I can't remember off the top of my head now how many there were. But I'm feeling anxious and I'm like thinking to myself, like, okay, like what's going on here? What are you feeling? So I like kind of like come into my breath. Everyone's just in conversation. I'm just like kind of half listening, kind of in my own world. Well, I remember this thing from one of like the trainings that I did around like trauma that like tapping like the opposite sides of the body when going into like traumatic and like difficult situations, it like helps like soothe and kind of like balance, if you will, like the nervous system and like the response. And so I'm like underneath the table, like tapping on my legs. And I'm like, okay, like why am I anxious? Like what is happening? And what I found and what I realized was that the music was reminding me and taking me back to being in college, being in that situation before, like the night, before I was raped. And the music, the party atmosphere, the people, I realized that like there was part of me that my body was like, that's unsafe. This is unsafe. This is unsafe. Red flag, red flag. And it's just like, and I wasn't, right? Like I was safe. And how beautiful to notice, again, this story held in my body that a certain kind of people or a certain kind of music or having fun is like not safe. And how that has affected so many years of my life, which I don't regret at all. I just now I get to look at it and be like, oh, like, okay, I get to rewrite that story now. Same as with like, I won't go into the entire story, but basically when I was like doing a lot of like reclamation work around like the wild woman within, right? Like I found that I had deemed that part unsafe because I blamed that situation on her, right? Like the wild woman that's like, she's fun, she's expressive, she's like, and when you're young and like, I'll say like underdeveloped wild woman, you're just kind of wild. But I deemed her unsafe. I was basically like, what happened is your fault. And like, how sad is that? And so again, I say these things because like there are stories living in our bodies from old wounds, from old hurts, from past events that until we're able to really look at them and see them and understand them and send some love to them and offer them some healing and some nourishing and like a rewriting of a story, they'll continue to kind of like wreak havoc underneath the surface and deny us of the things that we really want most in this life. Which leads to this really intense, triggering event that I had not long ago, 2, 3 months ago. It was with my husband. It ultimately had nothing to do with him, and it had nothing to do with like the circumstances that he was involved in. And it was insanely triggering. Like, oh man, I was so triggered. Like the most triggered that I've been in years, 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 years. Like I'm saying like years, like 10 years, like a very, 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 very long time. And once I got past the intensity of like the triggers and the feelings and the emotions and like all of that, I was able to like sit and journal. And I remember writing like, whoa, like, this is the most triggered you've been in so long. What is here for you? Because there's something in our triggers. It is showing us a place that needs attention, that needs tending, that needs healing, that needs love, that needs rewiring. Like, triggers are a gift. They are just like pointing us right to the thing. And for me, the thing was showing me basically, I remember telling a friend, like, and this is how I knew that I'd really come to like this culminate. Cause I remember feeling for a while, like, especially after like, so I had my grand opening for shadow.n.soul in October of 2022. And I remember shortly after that time, like around this time of like the death of old self, the birth of new self, like all of these kinds of things happening in a very similar time frame, like in the late fall, like early winter, where, oh, I just lost myself. Where was I going? Triggers. Oh, oh. Got it. You gotta bear with me. So I was talking to a friend about these really big triggers, and the words that came out of my mouth were like, I I long, like my heart's like deepest longing desire is to be and feel desired, so much so that it hurts, that it hurts. And like, this is where I was going with this. Like, leading up to that time, like I was feeling this, like, because things had come full circle, and it felt like those things no longer had the hold on me that they used to, right? This fear of what other people think, like not showing up authentically in the world, or like not full version of self, or these workaholic tendencies, they no longer seem to have the hold on me that they used to. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what's next? Like, literally, what's next? I know there's got to be something else. And when I heard those words come out of my mouth of like, I want it so much that it hurts, it was like, bing, 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 bing. Because it was like, there it is. There it is. The things that like we desire and long for so much that it hurts. Like, that's also like a trigger, just like a glaring signpost for where we should be putting our attention and our energy and our love and our healing and like pouring our magic into. And for me, the word desire could be interchanged with love, to love and be loved by, to desire and be desired by. It's really just like in the receiving, like this deep, deep desire to receive the things that I long for. And the reason that it hurts is because of this seeming inability to like not be able to receive what it is that I want. Like this block that I have, or this like denial, like pushing away of what it is that I want. And so I feel like that is like a lot of what has been like hovering for me, right? Like these big themes in my life. Now, if we fast forward a little bit to, I'll say, like, where the inspiration for this podcast came back, which was at Shambhala Music Festival, which was about a month ago. I feel like that's like a really good place to go next. So, leading up to Shambhala, which by the way, my husband and I were like fairly avid music festival goers pre-pandemic. We would go to at least one, mostly like two music festivals a year for like a long time. For most of our marriage, we've been married for almost 12 years until the pandemic happened. And in 2020, we had tickets to Shambhala Music Festival, which is up in Canada. And obviously it got canceled. And so we had pushed our tickets, like we were allowed to like transfer them to a future year. So we chose 2023. And so like preparing for this festival, like not only am I just excited because it's like, oh man, we get to go back after all of these years, but there were all these other layers, really beautiful layers. One, the first and foremost, the big one that like comes up is like one of my favorite things about music festivals in the past was when I would go, there was like this immense sense of freedom that came with it. Like I felt like I could show up like fully who I was, like no judgment, no worry. Like I was just there to have fun. I was there to receive. I was there to be in joy. Like it was just, I just remember it's just like freedom, freedom, joy, joy, like this lack of like fear that I felt. It was my favorite part. And so to be going back to Shambhala, a different version of myself where it didn't feel like I needed that like escape anymore to feel those things, that I had done so much work inside, that I was feeling a lot of that freedom on a day-to-day basis. Like no longer was I letting the fear of what other people thought of me or like the judgments or what it looked like, etc., to hold me back. Like I really started to embody like the fullness of who I am, and being like, one of my teachers uses the word like soul esteemed, like this is what my soul desires, this is what my soul wants, and this is what I'm doing. I don't care what anyone else thinks. Like this is it for me. And like really living from that place. And like all of these practice that I've done like over all these years, one main one like being ecstatic dance, which is so much about being this like uninhibited like version of self, and like allowing yourself to like be with the music and allow the music and the energy to like move through you like freely and to express through you regardless of what it like looked like and how that translates to the day to day, right? Like, how do we allow ourselves to just like be with the energy of the day to day and to express in a way that feels good, regardless of what other people think or regardless of what the people next to us are doing? Like, I developed these capacities like already within myself. So to go back to this festival, like already feeling these things, I was like, oh man, I'm just gonna like feel all the excitement and the joy and the freedom to like the nth degree. I was so excited. So there's that piece. And then there's this other piece of like, it was interesting. Like I didn't notice it until like really close to time, but I was like choosing my outfits for what I was going to wear. And my husband had gotten me this like LED whip toy in my birthday in February that I had been practicing with, which like for years I told myself that I was going to like pick up poi or play the guitar or like do these like kind of like fun like joy things I never let myself do because of like these workaholic tendencies. Like I didn't know how to relax, like I didn't know how to like prioritize like play or anything like that. But like over the last several months, like seeing the growth inside of myself where I was actually prioritizing play, and I was letting myself like do these things. I'd signed up for guitar lessons. Like there was more spaciousness in my life, there was more ease in my life, just like all of the things like coming like together. And so in preparation, like even like something as simple looking for like my outfits, right? There like I noticed that I was like, because I was recording myself when I was practicing with this pixel whip, and I've been so funny. Like one day when I was like looking at the recording, because I grew up an athlete, and so there's just like part of me, it's like pretty ingrained in me that like when you're trying to learn something, like you got to watch yourself. It's how you learn. And so I would record myself and then I would like watch, and I kept finding myself in this like contorted like position, and I was having like some weird body issues like with my low back and my spine and all. So I would feel myself get into this like weird contorted position. I'm like, what the hell? And I would like recenter myself and like watch, and then like slowly over time I would feel myself like come back in this contorted position. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And so I'm like, pause the video and I'm like putting myself like into the position, trying to figure out like how am I ending up in these positions? And what I realized, what is my body telling me? Was the question I was asking. And what I realized was that I was literally turning away from myself. Like I didn't want to look at myself on the video. And when I noticed that, I was like, oh my gosh, like you were literally shying away from yourself. You were literally looking away from yourself. Like, what is that about? And so I'm looking at my video and I'm like, "Why though? Like, you're so beautiful. Like, you're like so like much fun." Like, and I was wearing the costumes or the outfits that I was going to be wearing for like the festival. I was like, "You're so like sexy." I'm like saying all these things to myself, like really like loving on myself and like how hard it was to like receive myself, my like admiration for self, like which like so here's another like thing that I'd done for myself. This was a decision I'd made like after those really like big like triggers. And so much of the work that I've been doing, because it has to do with receiving and the feminine work, it's so connected. And because of like my trauma around like sexuality, like there's this really like big theme here. And so I'd signed up for this program called the Pleasure Path. And it's very much tantric in nature, in the same way that like asana is only a tiny little piece of like the yogic pie. Sexuality, like sacred sexuality, is only a tiny little piece of the tantric pie. And it's definitely an important piece. And one of the things that I had uncovered around this time in this program, which is still actually going on right now, is we had this exercise to figure out what are our three non-negotiables in intimacy. And at first, when we're doing this exercise, we're thinking about it in context with like our relationship with like our intimate person, so my husband Kelton. And like the three non-negotiable things that came up for me were passion, undivided attention, and to desire and be desired by. Which, what I loved about this is once we like came to these three non-negotiables, she's like, okay, now we're taking away your partner and we're looking at how do you provide these things for yourself. I loved it. It was so good. I didn't see it coming. You know, undivided attention and passion, a little bit easier to figure out, but this piece around like, what does it even mean to desire oneself? And I felt like when I found myself turning away from myself, that was like a tiny little piece of it. There's this other little piece that came up during the music festival itself. So we'll get to that in a moment. But what I noticed also with like that video and the watching of myself was that like, in years past with music festivals, I would wear fairly like normal clothes to the festival, like nothing like out of the normal. But this year, like they were definitely more like sexy. They were definitely more like revealing. They were definitely more like risque. And I had this moment where I was like, well, what? That's interesting. Like, what is that about? And what I found was that I felt more safe. Again, like, as I've started to embody more and more of like this like feminine like way of like being in the world, it's like I also like uncovered like this fear of being desired, this fear of being alluring. Again, and back to this thing, right? We talk about like the thing that you want most. Well, there's going to be direct conflict. So like if I want most to like be desired and to feel desired, well, there are reasons why I also don't want to feel desired, or I feel like it's not safe to be desired. And like I don't feel like I need to say it again. I think like it makes sense with all the examples that I've already given you. But even though there are still like pieces to be untangled, I can also see the progress that was being made. So anyway, I'm very, very excited to go to Shambhala. So fast forward to Shambhala Music Festival. And honestly, like the music festival itself and the coming home from it, like this is the window in time. So this is, like I said, it's only like the last month or so. Now I told you, I knew that I would want to come back to the podcast, put it back in my back pocket. I would know when it was time to come back. And when I was at Shambhala, like I want to say every single day, like it came up and I was reminded of like, hey, like it's time now. It's time now. It's time now. And so I knew that like Shambhala would be part of the story. What I didn't know that it wouldn't just be Shambhala, that it would be like a whole slew of events that would help like really bring all of this together, which is what we're getting to. And so when I'm looking at like Shambhala in the weeks following, I feel like there's a couple big things that I want to touch on. The first one being that like this last month, Shambhala, the coming home process has been like all of the things. Like life is all the things. Like full spectrum of emotion, from super uncomfortable, super difficult, super challenging, super triggering, super upsetting, to like so beautiful and like winning big time and like so excited and like such expansive growth and so much love and so much magic and beauty. Like it's just, it's and everything in between. And it was just like up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, like expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, like, and that's just life. And one thing that was reflected to me was like this expanded capacity that I have to be with all of life, which is really beautiful, to like to be able to like, for example, there was so much travel shenanigans going on this trip, like flight being delayed, not being able to make our connection, having to drive to Charlotte, which is like 3 hours away from us, in order to like make our connect, not getting any sleep, getting to the festival, waiting in like a 10+ hour line that I was totally unprepared for. On the other side of the festival, like, uh, again, just like an entire day of waiting in car lines, getting turned away from one border, having to go to another border, like getting car sick, getting a upper respiratory infection on the way home because the festival was so dusty. Coming back home, my dog, I have to get a cone on his head because like he's got this hot spot he developed when he was like with his like trainer and like border. And then I buy these like new placemats, and apparently like cats are severely allergic to water hyacinth, even in like these processed forms, like this, the braided seagrass. She's got some crazy like reaction having, she's drooling for over 36 hours. Like I come home, like just shenanigans, like absolute shenanigans. And all the really, 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 really beautiful things that happened at the festival itself. And then like some even really potent, beautiful things that happened after. And like my ability to be with all of it, to not let the challenging things take away from the joyful things, and to not allow like the joyful things to take away from the challenging things, to be able to look at those and like really honor those too. It's not easy. And I don't know, the more I feel like life is more full bodied when we can allow ourselves to be with all of the things in equal measure. And I feel like more medicine and more lessons and more wisdom is available to us when we can be with all of the things. I'm going to hammer that in this episode, lots of episodes. But anyway, I want to get to like a couple of like specific things like from Shambhala itself. So there were like 3 big lessons that I really want to talk about. But what's interesting is there's this one thing that's coming up. I guess it really wants to be shared. On the very first day, after all the travel shenanigans, I was like, okay, we're gonna like put that, we're just like, that is done. We've officially arrived. Like it's time to like be in joy and pleasure and to receive in all things. Um, my husband and I were walking back from the river, heading back to the campsite. And as we were walking, I could hear like someone over the loudspeaker. They were doing some kind of workshop at one of the stages. And some of the words he was saying was like activate, open your heart, grounding. And I was like, oh, he's like speaking my language. Like, what's going on over there? So like we go over there, and this guy is like leading some kind of embodiment type workshop about like connecting more with your heart space and connecting more with self and connecting more with others and like joy. And I was like, oh hell yeah. So we started to participate, and like right away he asked for like like 3 like or I think it was maybe 5 volunteers to like jump into the middle. And I was like, I'm in. Which again, totally different, like this new beautiful brave version of Rainy. So I was so excited. I'm like, I'm in. So I like jump into the middle of the circle. And the activity that he had us do was like, he would ask each of the people who volunteered to be in the center to like share their name. And then when he shared their name with like the group, like on the microphone, everyone was to like chant their name and like wiggle their fingers like at them and like hop towards them, like in the center of the circle. So when it got to me, I just said Ray because Rainy was too hard. Everyone was like, Ray, 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 and like jumping closer to me and like wiggling their fingers and like sending me love. And I just remember like feeling like, oh God, like here I am like working on receiving, and I literally have like hundreds of people like blasting like love at me right now, like all eyes on me, all attention on me, just like receiving love and joy and energy. And it was just so beautiful. And I feel like, this was a reflection that Cynthia, who I went to the festival with, she reflected back to me on like on the other side of the trip, like being back home, because I'd come into a lot of resistance, like I was saying, the shenanigans. And she's like, I think when we're on vacation, like we get to see how like present we are and how we like prioritize like self and joy and pleasure and like spontaneity, and how alignment we are with like the present moment energy and like what is calling. And when we get home, sometimes we get to like see where we're out of alignment with that. And I feel like that was like, it was so true, because I got to see there, like how in that moment I was so able to like receive like all of that attention, like all of that love. And then on the flip side, when I got home, how I was having a really hard time receiving, which we'll get to in a minute. So there was that. But anyway, I had a couple different intentions like throughout my time there. One big lesson that like came up that was very much like an overarching theme for the entire experience was that it was like I was so conscious of my choice. Like I choose my experience. I choose how I respond to something. I choose how I react to something. I choose my perspective. I choose my choice, my choice, my choice. And that like no one else is responsible for my experience. Like my experience is my responsibility. And if that's true for me, then that means that like everyone else is also responsible for their own experiences. So like other people's experience is not my responsibility. My experience is my responsibility. The best thing that I can do for me, and therefore the best thing I can do for everyone else, is to take ownership and responsibility for my experience and try to be in alignment with like what is in my highest and best interest, not in this selfish way, but like in a genuinely and truly, like, what do I need? Like, what most serves? And like, when we can move from that place, like, genuinely and truly, like, that is what serves everyone else. So, like, this theme of like, I am responsible for my experience, others are responsible for their experience. It was this beautiful overarching theme that really, really held with me all weekend. And it really, it started like on arrival, actually, when we were waiting that really long line. And like Cynthia and I, we took some like mugwort and we found like a little quiet corner in the trees, and we like smudged into some energetic hygiene. And like, that's when that came to me. It's like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. Like, I can hold on to this intention, which was really helpful because Cynthia and Mike were having their totally own, fairly separate experience from ours. And like, I could feel this part of me that was like, should I be taking them under our wing? Should I be more like guiding? Should I be more like, I want to say peer pressure in terms of like, come on, guys, like we've done this music festival thing before. Like, come with us. Like, you know, come to the river, come do this, like, come to this stage, come to the. And even though there was this part of me that felt this responsibility to like take them under my wing again, I had to keep coming back to this like, my experience is my responsibility. Everyone else's is theirs. I have to honor what is in my highest and best, and I have to trust that others are doing the same thing, and especially Cynthia, because we do this work together. You know, I was putting deep faith and trust in her and her ability to like discern like what is like best for her, even if it's totally separate and different from me, or even if I have different opinion or whatever. And so that was, that was a really beautiful part of the experience, was allowing that process, trusting her and her process, trusting me in my process. Let's see. Day two, this like thing that came to me was when I was dancing. It was at night. It was like kind of toward the beginning of the night. And again, like this ecstatic dance, ecstatic movement thing, like I was just like letting it rip. Like, I don't care what it looks like. I'm just like letting the music move me, how the music wants to move me. And I'm being like true to self and true to the moment and true to the energy, like wants to move through me. And like, as I was doing that, I had this like gnosis and this knowing come over me of like, when I'm true to the energy as it wants to like move through me and express in the moment, like not only am I literally alchemizing like the stuck, dense, heavy, blocked energy that doesn't serve within me, but I'm also automatically doing that for those around me as well. So like all night, like I just had like stay true to self, like stay true to self, stay true to self, like let it move through you, like let it move through. Cause I just knew that by doing that, like I was basically like a recycler, is what it felt like. Like I was just like recycling energy just by like being, just by being, which we'll come back to in a little bit. There's so much to share here. And then this final really big lesson from Shambhala on night 3 was, when I was asking, like, what is my intention? What is my intention? What is my intention? Like, what came through loud and clear is like, your intention tonight is to receive, to let this night like be about you. And there was this like gentle knowing in the background of like, I can receive fully and I can let this be about me while also being aware of the needs of others and honoring that. Like it's not taking away from others to honor me, to choose me. To receive doesn't mean that I'm taking away from another. And so it's this really beautiful night of getting to like embody that lesson, because I came home and it was so hard, so hard to like embody, but I got the visceral experience of like what it's like to receive and to choose me. And what I'll say too is that like in that day, it took me back again to this like non-negotiable piece I already talked about around desire. And I feel like I found that because I was thinking to myself, like, how does one desire oneself? And what I found that the word choice was very much synonymous with like desire. Like, if I want to feel desired, it's because I want to feel chosen. Well, how do I choose myself? And so it was this like beautiful opportunity to like choose myself. Like, and I kept singing this song inside of my head. Um, like there's a song I used it for the reel that I made for our time in Sham. It's like follow the vibe. And it's like we were walking around and like we would go to this place and that place. And if I wasn't feeling it, I was like, follow the vibe. So like where are we going? Just like, just following the vibe, like following what calls, like following what like feels good and resonant. And like, why don't we do that in our day to day to day? So anyway, beautiful, beautiful experiences, as well as like very intense challenges. Came home. Coming home from any trip is hard, especially with travel shenanigans, especially with the nature of that travel, like camping music festival where it's hot and dusty, you're not sleeping really, like you're dancing all night. Like it's so much. Then I came home. I was literally actually sick with an upper respiratory infection because it was so dusty. Like this festival is hosted at like a farm and just so much dust from the cars and the people. And I tried to wear a bandana all night, but I mean, I tried to wear my bandana like all the time, and my lungs are so sensitive. So I came back sick on top of all of the other things. Like I said, my dog had a cone around his head, and my cat had some crazy reaction, and she was like drooling for like 36 hours. Like it was so hard to land. So I'm tired. I'm depleted. I had also started my period. It was just like, I don't know what else to say. It was very challenging. And Kelton is experiencing all these things too, minus the period, but he did have to go back to work in a way that I don't have to. And when he went back to work, I was riddled with guilt and judgment. And I was just like, wow, like he has to like go back to work and, you know, what's the word? Like provide for us. And like, here I am. And like, I don't have to go to that kind of job anymore. And I can't even like clean the house and I can't even unpack and I have no energy to do anything. And like, I'm just like shaming myself. I'm judging myself. And because of that, I'm like, well, I got to do everything then because like this poor guy, he's like struggling too and he's still having to go to work. So I got to do everything. Like, he shouldn't have to lift a finger when he gets home. So I'm putting all this pressure on myself to do everything, every single house chore, every single animal thing, every single yard thing. In the midst of this, like the pleasure path, like homework we had for the week was to take ourselves on a date. And what I realized on this date was that like I've gotten really good over these years, especially coming from a background of personal training and group fitness and health coaching and yoga and like all of these things. Like I'm really good at self-care. That's not something that I need accountability for. It's not something that I judge myself for because I have deemed that as essential and necessary. For me, those are like that's what I would call non-negotiables. And I never had any problems with like the word selfishness. Never came up with any of those things. I was like, these are musts. These are must. These are not selfish. This is self-care. What's interesting though is like taking myself on a date to do something joyous or pleasureful. The word selfish kept coming up and coming up and coming up. And what I realized was that I deemed joy and pleasure as luxuries, not necessities. So I having this experience, having all this judgment and shame around the Kelton stuff. I'm putting so much on my plate. I'm like feeling overwhelmed. Something went wrong as things go wrong. And I had this like explosive moment where my resentment for my inability to prioritize self came out misdirected at Kelton, which was very unfair. And as the words came out of my mouth, I remember like feeling like because they stung and I knew they were misdirected, but I also knew they were true. And so I obviously apologized to him, made sure that he knew and understood that it had nothing to do with him. But in my reflection, what I realized is that, like, because I have such a guilt and a shame story around, I'll say, our lifestyle, that, like, I don't prioritize things that, like, should be prioritized, like ease and joy and pleasure, because I'm too busy, like, taking on the responsibility and, like, the obligation of all of the other things because I don't feel that I deserve to, like, have it so easy and, like, I need to earn my keep and, like, like, all of this kinda, like, stuff is coming up. And because I'm judging and shaming these circumstances, I'm not allowing the abundance and the space and the joy and all the things that I want and desire, like I'm denying them. I'm the one pushing them away because I'm judging them, I'm shaming them, I'm all of the things. And it's like he's trying to gift me. Like we've had this, agreement and this arrangement like from very early on in our marriage where it's like I worked to make sure that ends were met all throughout his entire schooling process. And like when he finished school and like he got like the job and the career that he was going for, like it was agreed that like I could take a step back and I could focus on like my passions and I could tend to the house and do all the things that like I want to do. And like here it is, it's all right in front of me. Like I can have it. And I'm judging myself for it, I'm shaming myself for it, I'm denying it completely. Madness. So I'm telling my friend these things, um, like via Polo, which you'll probably hear me talk a whole lot about. And I'm going to tell you about her response later because it totally relates. But I'm having a week like this. That week ends with another high. So it's like high, low, all the things, full spectrum of life. And I get to go to this body combat masterclass, which I told you body combat was going to come back. So body combat was the very first like group fitness class that I ever taught. It's a Les Mills program. And my husband and we went to New Zealand many, many years ago, and that's where Les Mills is based out of, and like where their home gym is, like the Les Mills gym, where like they create their videos, where like all their main instructors are. I was so excited to take body combat with Dan and Rachel, but they weren't there. They were like away doing some other kind of like presentation or whatever it was. And so I got this email on my way back from Sham that Rachel was going to be in North Carolina, like in my backyard, like 30 minutes away, doing a free masterclass, and like some continuing education workshops. So I had signed up for it on my way home from Sham. All those things happened. I'm still sick, kind of like can't breathe, but I was like, I gotta go to this. I gotta go to this. So I go. Class is amazing. It was amazing. the talks after were so inspiring. She gets talking on what she's calling like mental fitness. It's like part of like this mental health like awareness. And the way that she's like sharing is in like very vulnerable like story form. And I had been receiving like these little hits of affirmation like all along the way since like leaving Sham, since knowing that I should be bringing the podcast back. And that was just one more of them. I was like, yep, this is it. This is it. Like in story form, like taking things just like a little bit deeper. Like, so not only was it affirmation that like, yep, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Yep, this is what's next. Then I had this like full body like invitation from the inside. It's like, not only that, but you're also going to go ask her if she'll come on the podcast. And I was like, eek. So I mustered my courage, found her after class, thanked her for all the things, and I asked. And she paused and she considered and she said yes. And I got her information and it was such a big win. And it's something to look forward to. And with that being said, like there's no pressure, right? Because things can always change. And like who knows if this will be in alignment with her, like when the opportunity comes around, that doesn't matter. What matters is like it was such a big win. And as a friend reflected back to me, it was like I asked and I received. And again, it was just this like high, low, high, low, high, low. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go start my podcast. So the next day I was like, I'm going to record the first episode now. Like it's time. It's time. So I go sit down to like record this first episode and I met with technical difficulty after technical difficulty after technical difficulty. It's like 8 o'clock at night. I'm like still trying to figure this out. I'm feeling the frustration like build up, a very familiar frustration of like perfectionism. Like I gotta get it done, put your head down and just like do it. Just like all these very like workaholic things like coming up. And it was like, actually, no. Nope. Nope. We're gonna pause, we're gonna trust the timing, we're gonna trust the process, like we're gonna come back to this. Like it is time. Technically, you have started because you've been talking about it. Like da 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 da. I'm trying to like talk myself off the edge. And thank goodness that I one didn't like continue to create that same like rut in my brain, like deep in the groove of like these workaholic ways of being. Like not only did I do that, but in doing that, by stepping away, by trusting the timing and the process and not pushing and fighting and like forcing, so many beautiful things have transpired since that have brought this experience. And like I want to say this first episode to like a fuller, more beautiful, complete experience. And so I want to say it was like a day or two later where I was like in the kitchen. I was making cake pops, which by the way, like again, back to this Marco Polo thing. I actually shared this story on Marco Polo. And Marco Polo is like this free app. It's like an amazing way of connecting. I love it. I have something called a sharecast, which is like this, like it's this means of like this, like talking and sharing and like people being able to connect back with you and follow you. So anyway, I was sharing on my sharecast like this story right here, which by the way, like if it interests you, I'll leave a link in the description. You should totally come join us. It's basically just like this, just like shorter little stories at a time. So anyway, I'm in the kitchen and I notice that like my feet want to be free, but I don't want to take my socks off. And I noticed this come up a couple of times while I'm in the kitchen. I'm like, what is that about? Like, why aren't you taking your socks off? Your feet want to be free. And I realize it's because like I don't want to take my socks off, because if I take my socks off, then I'm gonna feel like all of the dust that my giant dog Juju like drags into the house, and these crumbs and the hair and all the things that I haven't swept because I've been tired. And I was like, when I felt myself like speak and name basically like my avoidance and my aversion to the experience beneath my feet, I was like, that's interesting. You should go journal about this later, because what else are you avoiding? What else don't you want to feel? What barriers do you have in place? Like my socks are this barrier between me and the information beneath my feet. Like what barriers do you have in place right now where you're not receiving what you're meant to receive? Like this feedback, this experience. So I go and I journal. And when I'm asking, like, what is it that I've been avoiding? What is it that I don't want to feel? The thing that comes up is what I've been talking about so much already is this seemingly like inability to receive the things that I desire: love, joy, pleasure, abundance, etc. And so I'm like, okay, what is this about? What is this about? So, on a societal level, what I find is that there's like guilt and shame and judgment because it's like, and this might not be everyone's experience, but there's this part of me that, like, when I think about society and I think about joys and pleasures and abundance, like the word that like comes up is like privilege. And it's like in some ways, I feel like the last couple of years, especially, have like made, and this, like, again, this might not be everyone's experience, but it's mine. It's like there's this part of me that's like, oh, like it's not good to be like to have privilege. Like it's not good to be abundant. It's not good to be happy because there's so much suffering in the world. Like, why me? Why me? So there's this societal level. Then I touch into like this another layer of like a communal level, and I can literally hear the voice of like a person in particular. Like I would share with them, like, oh man, like, I just like took this thing off my plate and I made more space for myself and I made these changes, things I was all really excited about and proud of myself for. And like the feedback I would get from them was, oh, well, wouldn't that be nice? And hearing that enough times, put me in this place where it's like, oh no, like I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling judged, I'm feeling like shame, like, oh man, like if, like, should I not have these things? Like if those around me like don't have these things, like am I allowed to have these things? Right. So now there's this communal level. I'm like, okay, well, there's gotta be more. Like there has to be like, what about me? Like, what about me? There's something deeper here. There's something deeper here. The first piece that I get is like, I don't want to like negate my responsibility that like, the truth is like no one can make you feel any certain way. It's like that saying, like, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So I have to take responsibility for the fact that like it's on me for like adopting these like ways of thinking and these opinions. And I was like, there's still something more here. What is it? What is it? So I'm like in this conversation with myself, I'm like journaling and I'm like, there's something else here. Like there's something else here. It's deeper. Can you show me? Can you show me? Like show me in memory. Show me something. Show me something. Show me something. Show me something. And finally I'm like flooded with these memories of like, I'm flooded with these memories of like childhood and adolescence. And it's like times of when I was struggling or going through something difficult or challenging or having some kind of like negative experience. And before I go further into this, I want to make it very clear that there is like no judgment here. There is no shame here. I think, when we do this kind of work, we realize that a lot of our stuff comes from the past. And a lot of our past is obviously like our childhood. And in this instance in particular, it has to do with my mom and it has to do with her coping mechanisms. And, same as like when we're talking about triggers and trauma, like coping mechanisms come from our triggers and our traumas. And it's like our way of like surviving and like getting through the things. So my mom, like one of her coping mechanisms is like being positive, which is a beautiful coping mechanism, by the way. But like being positive, like her motto is make lemonade. And so I have these memories of like being young and like sharing all these things and like her, and this is what we do. We use our coping mechanisms because that's what we know. And we use that with those that we love, like when we're trying to help them. And so she's trying to help me and she's trying to like offer the way that she like gets through things. But my little brain, like at the time, it was like I could literally, this is what I heard when I was being shown all these memories. I could literally hear my own like little adolescent voice, and it was like, but I don't want to be happy. And it was like, whoa, like there's the missing piece. There's the unconscious piece. Like there's another block. There's another way of denial. And I was able to like so clearly see like where that was like born. And whether it was because like I didn't want to feel something that I wasn't like authentically feeling, or I didn't want like happiness or joy or the bright side of things to take away from the experience that I was having, whatever the reason was, I don't know that it's all that important, but like being able to see that part of me that literally held this story of like, I don't want to be happy, that's huge. Because I think that sometimes it's just seeing these things, it's seeing the stories that we hold, it's being able to name them, it's being able to feel them, it's being able to understand them that like starts to loosen the knots, it starts to untangle the thing. And so here was this big, huge piece around all of like, you know what I mean? Like letting, and there it is, like just letting myself, like being curious about why I didn't want to take my socks off led to this whole journaling experience. It led to like so many of the ways of why like I feel like incapable of receiving the things that I most want to receive. I mean, like this is so much what this show is about. Like, how can we be curious? Like, how can we lean in? Oh, I just love it so much. So like that happened like a day or two after like the whole shenanigans of trying to get this podcast out the first time. And then like the next day or like a day or two later, I get this message back from my friend Josie. I told you I was like explaining to her like the guilt and the shame that I was feeling. She's a very wise one. And her video back to me, it was literally like God was speaking through her. Like, like when God speaks to you through other people, through signs, through symbols, through circumstances, like it was that. And she was reflecting back to me, like, you know, like why is it that you don't feel like you deserve this life that you not only desire, but that you've really worked for and that you certainly like deserve? And she was just reflecting back to me. She's like, I wonder, like, how much value do you put on all of the things that you do that aren't work? And she starts going down this like mundane list of things. Like, how much do you value your friendship to others? And how much do you value like the way you tend to your home and the way that like you cook and share your meals with loved ones? And how much do you value the kind of work that you've chosen to do in the world? And how much she's just going down and down this. I am ugly crying listening to this video because what I'm realizing is two things. One, I don't. I was not valuing those things. I wasn't valuing my beingness, which brings me back to like that night too of Shambhala. Like, I just in my beingness, I was like recycling like the energy. And so it makes me think, like, okay, like Josie's now reflecting, like, now I know I have this ability within me to like literally like transmute like stuck, heavy, dense energy that doesn't serve just by like being, not only in myself, but like those around me too. So now I know I can do this thing. Josie's now reflecting back to me that I don't value my beingness. Well, what if I was to, as she's inviting me to, really value my beingness and really embrace my beingness? And in my beingness, like maybe I'll be able to transmute these like really stuck, dense, heavy feelings I have around all these things, these guilts, these judgments, the shame, etc. Like, what if, what if, what if, what if? So that's a big piece of it. Like, how do I like really like value my beingness? And say, what was the other thing I was just gonna say though about Josie? I feel like there's something else. You have to just come back to me. But it was just beautiful to like have her reflect back to me. Oh, here was the other thing. So not only was I like being reflected how important it was, I need to like value my beingness. And this is what had me like ugly crying. But then there was this other part that I was seeing is she's like saying all these really nice, beautiful, amazing things about me. And on the inside, I'm having a very hard time receiving it because I'm like, well, if you only knew my internal workings, if you only knew what I thought and what I felt, then you wouldn't be thinking these things. And basically the imagery I got there was like my shadow self looking at a reflection, like looking in the mirror at itself, judging the shit out of itself. Like, I'm not going to accept this love and these compliments and these truths that you see about me because I'm looking at me and I'm not that. But it's like, and we've continued the conversation around this. It's like, but we all have that shadow side. And it's so unfair to like judge our shadow side. And if we're judging our shadow and we're judging our internal workings, then we're certainly judging others and theirs. And that's just not fair. Like, we all have it. And she reflected back so perfectly. It's like, we have it. We can't get rid of it. We're not meant to get rid of it. And this part of us, like, ultimately, all it tries to do is really protect us. And that is truth. Truth, 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 truth. And so it's like, how much love can we try to give this part of ourselves? Be like, okay, like, I see that you have a hard time accepting this, this, and this, and this. Why is that? It's like, it really is just trying to bring more love to self, to our shadow, to the dark, to all of that kind of stuff. So beautiful, so beautiful, so beautiful. So that happened. Let's see what else. There were more things. Okay. So a couple days later, then um Kelton and I are being intimate with one another. And I have this like tape playing in my head that like, oh no, like this is taking too long. Like he's not into it. Like he's gonna get tired. He's gonna get sick of it. I'm not able to receive what he's trying to offer me because I have this head, like this thing in my spirit. This is taking too long, and like, like this is like, is he okay? And I ended up crying because I just realized I have this thing with like time, and like what kind of kept coming up was like how much I hate wasting time, and I have all these like memories of like wasting time, wasting energy, wasting money, waste. Like I have such a pet peeve with it. And when I was exploring that later, what I found, because basically what was happening is like there's this tape playing in my head that basically like my pleasure is a waste of time. That's ultimately like what that tape in my head is. And so I'm sitting with it. I'm like, okay, where does this come from? Where does this come from? Where does this come from? It's totally rooted in like the workaholic ways of being that I was so ingrained in for so many years. So with all of these things that have like transpired over the last several years, over the last month, like I'm looking at all of them. They're right in front of me. Like they're starting to like land on the ground. And I'm like, okay, like I see, I understand. There's this like pretty clear picture that's in front of me. How do I work with this? How do I work with this? And I had this beautiful week. It was last week. What is today? Yeah, it was last week where every day my goal was like bringing together the really developed, beautiful qualities and capacities that I have from these like masculine oriented like energies and qualities. I brought all of those in, and then I brought in like all of these like lunar feminine qualities and aspects that I've been cultivating, and I tried to bring them together, and I get this visual of like a river of like the masculine is like the banks, and it's just like holding firm, it's holding steady, it's like witnessing, it's like this, it's holding, and then letting like the feminine just like flow and like do the thing. And like if you have a fair amount of freedom in your schedule, you know that that's actually really hard. Like freedom is really hard because you can go so many different things. Like discipline and routine can be really challenging, but I've really been trying to practice like being in the moment, right? Like back to like the alchemy thing of like, how can I be true to this moment in the way that energy wants to move through me right now? And how can I choose, because my experience is my responsibility? And how can I prioritize like not only like my base self needs, but also joy and pleasure and abundance and all of these other things as also necessities and not luxuries. And how can I bring all of these lessons of valuing myself now that I've looked at all the ways that, I mean, not all, but I've looked at a lot of the ways where I block and I deny. And how do I just take all this and how do I put it to practice? And I just had this beautiful week of putting it all to practice where I felt like I was navigating in this like new way, this like new version of self. Like, even with this podcast right now, like, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it on this day. Well, then, like, the hours went by. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to press it. And it's just like, this happened yesterday. My intention was to record it, but like the setup took so long. I was like, no, 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 I'm not going to push it. I'm not, because I felt this part of me that's like, all right, well, I'm not gonna be able to do my workout today. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to like make dinner. We're gonna have to order out. But like those are things that I want. Like I want balance. I want balance. I want all the things I desire. Like yes, I desire to do this kind of work in the world. Like yes, I desire to put energy and time and attention into like my callings and like my offerings. And that's not the only piece of my pie. Like I have many pieces of the pie. I also want to tend to self. I want to tend to home. I want to tend to husband. I want to tend to my fur babies. I want to tend to my friends. Like I have all of these other things that I want to do. I have hobbies. I have leisure. Like I'm trying to like incorporate like all of these things. And like for yesterday, it was like I caught that part of myself that was like, I'm just gonna put my head down. I'm just gonna do it. And I didn't. I chose different. I was like, nope, we're just gonna stop. I'm gonna go do my workout. I'm gonna go make dinner. I'm gonna hang out with Kelton. In the evening, I'm just gonna like work on my newsletter and then I'm gonna try this again tomorrow. And that's what I did. And it's just like, ugh. So it's like not only like am I coming to you, like I said at the very start of this episode, like a very different version of self. I'm just like coming with like new habits and new ways of being. And I'm just like so excited to like be having these conversations because again, I feel like there's so much medicine in our experiences. There's so much wisdom. And I just look forward to sharing, to having others on this show, like sharing their medicine. And my question for you is like, we wrap this up is like, what versions of self are dying? What versions of self are being born? What is life and all of your circumstances trying to teach you? And how are you gifting yourself and others by sharing? That's it. Ah, that's it. Like I said at the beginning, this is the last episode of On and Off the Mat and the very first of the Shadow and Soul story time. The official relaunch will be in the fall, later in the fall, and there'll be special guests and all sorts of things to look forward to. In the meantime, I just invite you to pay attention, to be curious. Yeah. Thank you for listening, for watching. I so look forward to connecting with you in whatever way I get to next.